Yeah. I spit raps like a heart attack, fast fatal heart impacts, past painful scars. In fact, I blast tasteful bars and packs. I back up my actions, fact don't ask, grab reactions, jacked attack with every word, then act with class as they hear me snap. I got nothing to lose, cause I fought and felt the bruise. Now I'm not the one confused, call the shots and they produce. I ain't lost, I'm finally loose, pick a new silver excuse. I need the views to boost me to a new abuse of being used. Everybody wants a piece now, y'all can rest in peace now. You're dead to me, so peace out. Remember, you're just freaked out. Get ready for defeat now. I'm gonna make you bleed out. Listen on repeat now and weed out all the weak now. Get up and make a change. Don't remember yesterday. If you got something to say, speak your mind before your grave. Cause your life is yours to save. Ain't nobody gonna change. Everybody stays the same. So be different, make a name.
Hello and welcome into the University Podcast. It is Tuesday, the 22nd of February, 2022. Literally TWO Tuesday. And we're back. Obviously, we took a little hiatus during the season, but it's time to bring back the university because we have a lot of rookies to talk about. If you know me, you know I love the NFL draft. So we're going to be talking about the draft up until then. And then after that, we're going to kind of switch into that college fantasy kind of Devy stuff once again, get back onto that. So obviously starting with rookies, there's one guy that I had to have come on today, and that is the one and only Blake A. Hampton. You can find him on Twitter at Blake A. Hampton. He is one of the members of the Undroppables. He goes back a long way. He used to be here, like this podcast. He took a hiatus, and now he's back. How are you doing today, Blake?
I'm good, man. How about yourself? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I just have one question for you.
Blake.
What? Do you want to go to war, Malaki?
No.
Because we could go to war.
No.
I'm for real. I'm for real.
Do you want to go to war, Balake?
I mean, I don't know if I'm really looking for war. It's funny, you know, my profile picture on Twitter is Balake from that skit. My name has never been the same since that skit came out, but I actually have had people ask me if that's actually me. In Twitter DMs, I've had people reach out and ask if that is actually me in the profile picture. So
I think it makes sense.
I
don't know.
My life has never been the same since that skit's been put out. My name's never been the same. Life's never been the same.
I don't know if you saw it, but I used it for the YouTube thumbnail too. So
I didn't actually. That's great.
I'm propagating it further. Well, obviously, Blake is our head of analytics at the Undroppables. So if we're going to be talking rookies with Blake, we're obviously going to be talking about them analytically. And today we're going to be talking about wide receivers and running backs. That's obviously, you know, those are where the models really work, right? I mean, quarterback, whole nother crapshoot.
It's crazy.
Tight ends, just not fun. So,
yeah. Quarterback, I mean, the day I figure out the quarterback model will be quite the day because
that's the day you're at NFL GM.
Good at it. Jacob Sanderson over at Roto Underworld recently put out a chart that they're pretty much anyone who's drafted in the first round is guaranteed 3 years, but the likelihood that they're a QB1 like 3 times in their career is very unlikely. So, I mean, quarterbacks are just a mess to try and figure out.
Yeah, I mean, the day you figure out that model, I mean, Vikings calling you, Chiefs calling you, like right. Once Holmes is gone, they're going to need another guy. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. So we'll start with wide receivers. I mean, if there was like one position that feels like it's the most found out, it's wide receiver.
Right.
So what goes into your process for evaluating a wide receiver?
So I think some of the more modern stats that people are looking at are the yards per team pass attempt for wide receivers. I think that's kind of become, in the analytics community, a little more adopted as a really good way to view a wide receiver prospect. And for those that aren't familiar with it, it's exactly what it sounds like. How many yards a player gets in comparison to the total pass attempts of the team. So the higher their yards per team pass attempt is, the more they are involved in the offense, the more that they are hogging a large share of the team's offense. And that typically means that they are a good player. But what I do is I actually break it down into 3 different components. I like looking and adjusting that number for age. So I'll adjust a number, their productivity based on the age that they're at when they produce those numbers. I will do it a conference adjusted. So that way you can look at it essentially from a conference average yards per team attempt. So you're taking their number divided by average of conference adjusted, or the conference yards per team attempt. And then I'm also looking at it based on team adjusted. So how they do comparatively to the rest of their team when you're looking at the players. We'll talk about Garrett Wilson a little bit, but when he's going up against a lot better talent in terms of who he's competing with for targets, you can make that sort of adjustments for their yards per team attempts as well.
So what do you think about things like, size and speed? Because obviously we had this whole debate last season with Devonta Smith, like, oh, he's 200 pounds soaking wet, he's never going to succeed, whatever. Do you find that that's true or that's false or what?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because if you look at it purely from does size have any correlation to success, or does speed have any correlation to success for players? The answer really is no. They have a really low correlation between athletic measurables and success in the NFL. However, you can't discount that if you're looking for comps and you're looking for players who, what is the roadmap for this player to succeed? If there are very few players, you can't really necessarily feel confident in someone with a certain size and weight to succeed. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case, but then they technically become an outlier because we do have a lot of wide receivers who have entered the NFL. They become an outlier at that point, and it's really hard to bet on outliers to succeed. So I wouldn't say that there's a hard and fast analytical, these sort of athletic measurables do relate to success, but it does make for good comps that you're not betting on a outlier at that point to succeed.
Absolutely. That totally makes sense. And now we can go ahead and jump straight into the actual guys themselves. And now that we know kind of what's going on behind the curtain, and you showed me your what the model spit out basically today. Treylon Burks, no surprise here. He was the top guy. This is a guy who had a 41.76% weighted dominator last season, 3.52 receiving yards per team pass attempt. Just absolutely dominated Arkansas. What makes him so special?
Yeah, man. So, as you said, there's a lot to love here. When looking at it from the different breakdowns that I talked about, conference, age, and team adjusted. So he actually had a 1.09 team average. So adjusting for the rest of his team. So 1.09 receiving yards per team pass attempt, team adjusted. That is a 96th percentile score compared to everyone who's entered the NFL draft at this point. That is very high. In terms of conference adjusted, he has 0.71 receiving yards per team pass attempt. That's an 89th percentile. For adjusting for age, 0.49 receiving yards per team pass attempt. That's a 93rd percentile. Right now, he is projected to go in the first round. Some people consider him maybe one of the first ones off the board. I think he'll probably be closer to second or third, but I still think he'll be a first round pick. If you want to take those percentiles with a first round draft pick, his comparables are Amari Cooper, Jordan Matthews, Allen Robinson, Hakeem Nicks, and Sidney Rice. So that is a pretty good group of players to be considered in terms of a prospect coming into the NFL.
I am attracted.
Yeah.
For the PG version.
Are you as big of a fan on Treylon Burks? Is he your number one right now?
Oh, for sure. I shouldn't say oh for sure, because Garrett Wilson pretty darn good.
Right.
So yes, but he's not in a tier by himself. I think it's fair to say he's, the best wide receiver, and it's possibly fair to say he's the 1.01 and a non-super flex.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's fair to say it's like it's a runaway, like some people want to say.
Yeah. There's a lot of film people who seem to have some concern too. I don't know. And I mean, I feel like you're doing gymnastics at this point if you don't have him at the 101. I see some people having Drake London as well. And actually, I like Drake London a lot. But in terms of kind of diving into all this, unless there's a film breakdown that has some concern on him, I mean, I don't see how he's not the number one for people in terms of, for fantasy football perspective, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, all I've really heard is like issues with press, not lining up outside a lot. And I mean, that's fair, but we've seen guys like that have that issue succeed immensely in recent years, whether it be like Justin Jefferson. We were concerned because he only played in the slot, and now he's killing it outside. Yeah. Obviously, different types of receivers, but production happens because players are good, usually.
Right.
And then you just said you love Drake London, so we'll move over there because this guy was number 2 in the model you sent me today. 30.89% weighted Dom, 2.17 receiving yards per team pass attempt last season. Obviously, injured midway through the year, so not able to like put together a full season's worth of stats. But how do you break down Drake London?
Yeah, man. So really, the only numbers that aren't so all of his conference adjusted yards per team attempt and his age average adjusted yards per team attempt are both above the 90th percentile mark. For conference adjusted, 91 percentile mark. And you can make the case when you're looking at those numbers, looking at your conference strength. So you may consider the Pac-12 just not as strong of a conference when you're looking at that. It doesn't matter to me much. I'm still looking at this in terms of he's playing the competition he has. So having a 91st percentile in that conference adjusted is still impressive to me, regardless of the conference you're playing in. And then also with the age adjusted, having a 0.51 yards per team attempt in the 94th percentile is a really good number. The number that is starting to kind of dip below that 90th percentile is his team adjusted yards per team attempt. And you can factor that into having some really pretty decent talented players over his career. Recently seeing Amon-Ra St. Brown, enter the NFL looking like a star off the bat. But he had 0.52 yards per team pass attempt adjusted for team average as well. And that's a 72nd percentile. So even factoring all that in, I mean, he looks on paper and numbers like a really good prospect. He's really good size. I know some people have some concern about his weight. I do think it'll be interesting to see what he weighs in at, the next time. I don't know. I doubt he weighs in at the combine, right? He's still out for a while.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure on Drake.
So whenever we get his weight, he's listed as 210. I think he could be anywhere between 210 and 218, 220, something like that. But I saw someone posting earlier that there's really few comps for someone who's 6'5", 210. And honestly, I'm not too concerned at this point based on the numbers that I'm seeing. And I think he's going to be a really good receiver in the NFL.
Absolutely. I do wonder, are those receiving yards per team pass attempt numbers you mentioned, are those like adjusted for the missed games or what?
Yeah, so I do adjust for missed games in there as well. If a player is out for a majority of the season, I actually just toss the season. There's still it's actually interesting because going back historically, there aren't a ton of prospects that we see who like have like a detrimental ACL tear like before they're coming into the NFL. And so it is tough for people like myself who are doing this very analytically to factor in those type of injuries. But as of now, if it's a majority of the season, I'm tossing the season. And then I do adjust based on that injury when it's something a little more like how Drake London's was.
On the wrong tab. Yeah, I mean, what's crazy is that this dude only played 8 games. I mean, the rest of the conference, most of those guys are playing 12, and he was still leading the Pac-12 in receptions and receiving yards at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Like, that's incredible. And, I mean, he was doing it with, Kidon Slovis at quarterback, which was pretty much a failure at USC. So, really impressive numbers from Drake London.
Yeah. I know there's some concern about the type of receiver that he is. But as I said, I mean, I feel like the numbers speak for themselves. And I think at the end of the day, he's a good football player. Good football players will find their way on the field and demand targets. So I don't think you can ask much more at that point.
Yeah, and I mean that kind of thing sneaks in with me a little bit with the mold of the wide receiver, these jump ball guys. I mean, we talk about guys like N'Keal Harry, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, who succeeded doing this in college but didn't succeed in the NFL. None of those guys that are usually mentioned in that conversation are 6'5".
Right.
Like, that's been the differentiator for me with London is like, you're 6'5", maybe jumping over people is something that you can do consistently even against NFL talent. So
yeah, you just worry it becomes the whole Mike Williams deal where all they're having him do is just run straight down the field. They just throw him a jump ball and then he's just getting crushed by players. That's the concern there when you're looking at someone like that. But I think he's good enough, and if he goes to a good enough situation where they can really utilize his talent, it could be something really great.
Yeah, and I mean, Mike Williams put up some fantasy numbers, like whether it be this season or
it took a new offensive coordinator and took a new coach to say, hey, don't just run down the field and we'll just lob you the ball every once in a while. Who's actually had a somewhat decent route tree.
I mean, even before last season, he had 1,000-yard receiving season and a 10 touchdown season. He just couldn't combine the two into amazing production.
No one who rostered Mike Williams felt this is great.
Hey, I felt it was great. Moving on to our next wide receiver, we got Garrett Wilson coming out of Ohio State. He's 6 foot 192 as per the Buckeye website. I mean, this is a guy who had a great season in 2020. Obviously, in the COVID truncated season, 33% weighted dominator, 3.21 receiving yards per team pass attempt. And then 2021 comes around and those numbers dip. I mean, I say they dip. They're still in like very good territory.
Right.
22% weighted dom, 2.14 receiving yards per team pass attempt. How do you break down a kind of a dip like that?
Yeah, so the majority of what I'm looking at, so I do have some variables that I'm looking at that are like their last season, how they produce on their last season. Most of the stuff I like to look at is the average across their entire career. I know a lot of people really like to see production early, and I think that's where my age-adjusted yards per team attempt really comes in. Because it does factor in their successful performance when they're younger or non-successful performance when they're younger. And you'll start to see that in those type of numbers. For Garrett Wilson, so I think it's a little unfair because I think there are some really good wide receiver prospects and analytically in this draft. So all of his numbers in terms of conference adjusted, team adjusted, and age adjusted are all above the 65% mark. But in my head, I'm looking at all these other players and I'm like, that doesn't seem very good. When in reality, it is good, you know? And I know that people people who study film really love what he does out there on the field. I heard his route running is very clean. He has a full route tree. He can do a lot on the field. So pair that with 75th percentile conference adjusted yards per team attempt, 68, even with his really talented teammates that he's had over his entire career. I mean, I think they're like 9. I heard someone say like 9 wide receiver prospects currently in the Ohio State wide receiver room who could be NFL players. And he still has 68th percentile yards per team attempt adjusted for team average. And then 74th percentile for age adjusted yards per team attempt average. I mean, that's still a really good prospect, you know, and combine that with the people who are studying the film. In his first round draft capital that he's probably going to get, I think he's going to be just as good of a bet to be successful as the other two we've talked about.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about how he had so many NFL prospects behind him. You look at Ohio State recruiting in the past, it's like 5-star wide receiver, 2 4-star wide receivers. Next season, 5-star, 2 4 stars, 2 5 stars, 2 4 stars. It's like, why do you have 20 wide receivers on your roster who are all high 4-stars? Because, I mean, some people think it's a detriment to them because they're making promises to these kids. But at the end of the day, I mean, it just makes it that much more impressive that a guy really broke out there, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you see guys like Jameson Williams, who, prospect coming in. I mean, he transferred from there, right? From Ohio State. I mean, for that reason, he did himself a huge favor by doing that. And, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a few more of these Ohio State wide receivers start to kind of follow that path with how many they have. But if you're able to go there and succeed with, those type of players that you're also competing for targets with, to show that your talent differentiation from those other talented guys, I mean, you got it. You're going to be a good player. So, as I said, I think taking all that into account with these type of analytical numbers, even though he had that in quote dip this last season, I mean, I think he has just as good of a bet to be a real successful player as the other two that we've talked about already.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, with the rise of the transfer portal, I mean, just the NCAA allowing these kids to move whenever they want to, basically. I mean, this is a story that we're going to see again and again when it comes to guys like Jameson Williams, Jerome Ford transferring from Alabama to Cincinnati. It's just going to become more and more common. And in the future, looking forward, how do you think like analytics are going to adjust to that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's going to be it's going to be terrible, to be honest, because then you're having to start adjusting for multiple teams, because you can't really. I mean, it's good to be able to the good thing about what I'm doing is I'm adjusting for age, situation, and conference. So when you're doing that, you're still getting kind of a holistic picture of what they're doing comparatively to the rest of their field, to the rest of their team, and their conference as well. So looking at things on like a single variable is going to be kind of a tough sell when you're looking at just like touches and yards and things like that. But continuing to look at it holistically, kind of like the way that we're talking about now, I think is going to be a continued trend to, see how that goes.
Yeah. And then actually, the guy that's came out fourth in your model is Jameson Williams. So, what makes him so attractive in terms of, what makes him fourth in that model?
Yeah. So I actually don't have my numbers in front of me for him, but
miscommunication here. I missed him on the show sheet, but
it's all good. I'll put together a little blurb and put it out after this on Jameson Williams, because the database that I have is very thick, and trying to find him right now is not going to be ideal.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good thing that our databases are thick here at the Undroppables with 2 C's. So I think the one guy you are ready to talk about here actually came out 6th in your model, and that's David Bell. Obviously played at Purdue alongside Rondale Moore for the past 2 seasons before, kind of having the spotlight to himself this season. And then similarly to Wilson, we kind of saw a drop in production, even though he should be missing his best teammate. And that should, in theory, help him. What do you think kind of happened there?
Yeah, the thing about David Bell is he's a really consistent player, it looks like, from everything that I'm seeing. But he never really had kind of in terms of yards per team attempt. And I'm looking at just his best season adjusting for conference average, which the Big Ten's a very good conference, mind you. But he only had 0.79 yards per team attempt adjusted for conference, which gets him down to about a 48th percentile for that. So his best season that he had is not technically like a real impressive season when adjusting for conference, but everything else was really consistent. So even though, he may have had a little bit of a dip even without Rondale Moore, I mean, it could be a factor of there was more pressure that was being put on him from the cornerback perspective. Teams were targeting him more. because at the end of the day, I mean, he had a 90th percentile yards per team attempt adjusted for team average. So when he's getting that much work in terms of the rest of the team, there's bound to be more players that are, that more teams that are starting to put eyes on him, and, kind of more scheming for him getting the ball. So I'd assume it's something related to that. I think looking at his numbers, I mean, he's above 80th percentile in conference adjusted for his average over his entire career, in an 87th percentile for age adjusted. So I think he's going to be a solid player. I think that he doesn't necessarily have that ceiling that other players have, from what I'm looking at, but he can be a really consistent, decent wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And then one last, big wide receiver I want to talk about, who I figured, you gave me the list kind of after I made the show sheet. This was a guy that I kind of assumed would be up near the top. He actually came in at 9th, and that's Wan'Dale Robinson from Kentucky. Obviously, he started at Nebraska. Scott Frost couldn't figure out what to do with this kid. I mean, he knew he was good. He wanted to give him the ball, but he was
Scott Frost can't figure out a lot of things.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, he was like, he's a running back, he's a wide receiver, he's a slot guy, I don't know, maybe he's a tight end. Yeah. But he transferred to Kentucky. Stoops just threw him out there at wide receiver and let him play, and the dude balled out. How do you break down Wan'Dale Robinson?
So one of the things about the model that I sent you, so I do include a mock draft score in there as well. So that's kind of bumping him down a little bit in there because analytically he actually has a really good profile. I mean, his conference average, team average, age average, all above 85 percentile. So, I mean, he has a really good profile. The big concern that a lot of people are talking about is his size. There's a picture of him next to Nick Saban, who is not a tall man, and they are looking eye to eye. So I think what is he listed at in here? 5'11"? There's no way. Yeah, he's going to be 5'8", 5'9", and I may get some heat because I love Tutu Atwell. I love him. I don't care what anyone says. He has a very decent prospect profile. He's just very small. So it would be hypocritical for me to say that I'm out on Wan'Dale Robinson because of his size. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how tall is he. When people are evaluating it, where he's going to get drafted at. I mean, if he comes in at like 5'8", 5'9" at the combine, I mean, he may go down quite a bit in terms of where he'll get drafted.
Tutu Atwell was the second-round pick.
You had to have a very specific team and situation for Tutu Atwell to be drafted there. And, I mean, Sean McVay was a blessing for Tutu Atwell.
I mean, except after he got on the team, apparently.
Yeah, right. So
I laugh when you mentioned Tutu Atwell, but full disclosure, when I was in my first Campus to Canton league, he was my pick at like 201.
Thank you. Great prospect. I told
full disclosure, I didn't know how tall he was. I just
They didn't list it anywhere. You couldn't find it. You just thought, hey man, this guy looks great.
Dang, PFF likes this guy. He's got a lot of receiving yards.
He would be such an elite prospect if he was like 3 inches taller. Or 5.
Yeah. That was, I mean, looking back at that draft, I went 1.12, 201 to Morion Terry and Tutu Atwell.
I bet you're feeling great.
Later in the draft, I went Kyle Pitts, and then I got Ramondre Stevenson and Javonte Williams back to back.
There you go. Like you made up for it.
I made up for it. It all worked out in the end.
Tutu could still be something. It only goes up from here.
Hopefully.
I'm feeling good about it. I just got him in the 28th round of a startup. So I don't think it can get much worse.
Did you get Dare Ogunbowale as well?
The draft's not over, man. Don't share my secrets.
I mean, that's Alvin Kamara right there.
They're the same player. But yeah, honestly, the prospect profile in terms analytically for Wan'Dale Robinson, it looks really good on paper. So it's really just the things that are going to drag him down are things that have nothing to do with his on-field performance. And I mean, I can't really. I will speak to that when I put out my actual rankings, which will include some subjectivity in them. But just looking at his numbers, I mean, there's nothing that you can really look at and say he's not going to be good.
Yeah. And, the combine's only a week and a half away. We'll get to figure it out eventually.
I know. I'm so excited.
Yeah. We love seeing men run around in underwear.
Yeah. There's nothing better.
All right. So, those are kind of the wide receivers, the big names that I kind of wanted to talk about. Who else sticks out to you in this class is the next question. But I just saw you tweet like 2 hours ago. The people aren't talking enough about Jalen Tolbert.
Yep.
Here's your floor. Talk about Jalen Tolbert.
Yeah, man. So Jalen Tolbert, and this is kind of one of the first times I've really taken a look at him. I got a comment from Alfred over at Campus to Canton group who said there's a lot to talk about with his 5 years that he's been playing. So looking at how long a player has played in college is kind of a tricky one for me because I think there are a lot of, especially right now, I feel like a lot of players may have stayed an extra year for COVID. He specifically had an ACL tear very early into his collegiate career. But the thing is, he had, even adjusting for age, in his performance based on a younger age, he still had a very, very strong profile at a young age. It's not like last year, he just exploded. He's been very good throughout his college career, even having played 5 years. So he's above 90th percentile in all of the age-adjusted, team-adjusted, and conference-adjusted yards per team attempt. 6'3", 215 pounds. If he gets that day 3 draft capital that people are potentially talking about him getting, I mean, what is he going in mock drafts right now? Like mid to late second, end of third. People are saying that this draft, you don't want a late second, early third, because it'll die out quick in terms of talent. But I think he has a pretty good probability of being a decent player in the NFL.
That's interesting that you said his like age-adjusted numbers are good because, what I'm looking at, his second season, he went 5 for 60 and no touchdowns.
Let me see here. We'll get back to that. I'll take a look at that number and get back to you on that because the numbers that I have in terms of age adjusted, maybe that season was just thrown out, but I will certainly let you know.
All right. I mean, we got that live on the show. Anyone else that really sticks out to you at wide receiver?
Skye Moore, definitely. Skye Moore is one of those players a lot of the analytics community really likes. He also has, well above 90th percentile in all the categories that we mentioned before. He is here to right Corey Davis's wrongs from the Western Michigan wide receiver prospect. I hate to say that draft capital decides how a player is going to be in the NFL, but you'll see a situation like, I know it's a little different for running backs, but Elijah Mitchell, who a lot of players, even though he had a really great rookie year, a lot of players are discounting him or saying that he has a chance to be replaced because of his bad draft capital. And you'll kind of get that uneasiness in a player for how late they are drafted and their ability to be replaced at that point. So Skye Moore can get that, decent draft capital. When looking at this, I think he has a good possibility to at least get the opportunity to prove himself in the NFL.
I mean, I hear people talk about that with Skye Moore. My personal opinion is that there's no issue. Like we saw Dwayne Eskridge last season. his teammate, who he outperformed for multiple seasons, go in the second round. Like, why aren't we assuming Skye Moore gets, second or third round draft capital?
Right.
Is kind of silly to me. I think he's a lock for the third round, at least. But
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see what happens in April. Obviously, he can, bump up those numbers with some good athletic testing at the combine, and I think he's the type of guy who can run really fast. So,
by the way, for clarification on my Jalen Tolbert discussion, I am only accounting for his last 3 years.
Okay, there we go.
So ages 20 through 22.
Yeah, I mean, he must have been very young going into college then, because he had 2 seasons before that. So, yeah, I mean, that helps him as well. I mean, if he's still only 23 next season, coming off of 5 years in school, that's pretty young for 5 years in school.
You see players that are entering the NFL at like 24,
Yeah.
So him, even though he played 5 years, he is still only 22 entering the NFL. So.
Yeah, or if you were like Simi Fihoko, then you're 26 or something. But
right.
Good old Mormons. All right. Well, I think can move on to some running backs now. We talked about kind of what you put into your wide receiver model. So what do you kind of put into your running back model?
So it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. So the thing that's important about running backs is that they are getting a good amount of yards on the total team offense. And the thing that's a little different about them is they can get both receiving and rushing yards. So you really need to account for both. When it comes to looking at a prospect, I actually weight passing yards. So I pretty much have the weight of passing yards at like 1.5 compared to rushing yards at just a solid 1. So when I'm talking about weighted yards per team attempt, that's what I'm doing. I'm putting more emphasis on the passing yards that they're receiving rather than the just straight rushing yards, and keeping that as a even yards for one another. So I'm looking at weighted yards per team attempt total. I'm looking at weighting it for their team as well, so adjusting it for team total. And then I'm also looking at it at experience, so their age as well. So kind of a similar thing. I don't take conference into as much of account when I'm looking at running backs. I'm really just looking at their weighted total, their age adjusted essentially, and their team adjusted for the running back.
All right, let's say you had, no spreadsheets, nothing ready. You had a calculator though, and you have like a minute to evaluate a running back stats. What are you going to look at really quickly?
Yeah, so that's just the quick ones that I'm looking at. Honestly, some people you can make a pretty decent model for running backs based on draft capital and their weight adjusted speed score. Honestly, the thing that's funny about running backs is there's such a thin line between who's going to be good and who's not. Like you'll see all the time in the NFL, the starter's going to go down, and then you immediately go and pick up the backup running back off of waivers, and they end up being a league winner because that running back is still good. Like the difference between the guy who's drafted in like the second round and guys who will never get a shot in the NFL is actually very thin in terms of their talent margin. And we talk about this a lot, that running back doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, the differential between who is your backup and how they're going to perform really at the end for the most part isn't going to be too different. So looking at draft capital, looking at weight adjusted speed score, and then looking at the players who are getting the market share of their team's attempts, and looking at that by how old they are and how successful they are at a younger age is going to be the best way for you to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about weight adjusted speed score. How much does size matter at running back?
So size matters to a certain extent, right? It depends. What do you want your running back to do? I mean, are you looking for your running back to be a 3-down back, which isn't really a thing in the NFL anymore? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you're seeing guys who are 195 pounds being able to, carry a decent amount of workload because they have a decent BMI. I think there's a lot that goes into size. But really the only thing that matters to me is, I mean, if you're expecting your sub 200-pound guy to be a 3-down back, then you're fooling yourself on that. But if you're looking for a guy under 200 pounds, you want them to be a pass catcher. If they're going to be above that and a potential workhorse, you want them to have a good weight adjusted speed score. That's the deepest that I'm going to go into that is, obviously I'd love all my running backs to be 220 pounds, run a 90th percentile weight adjusted speed score, and be able to catch all the passes in the world. But, different running backs have different skill sets.
Well, there can only be one Ramondre Stevenson. So
right. Yeah.
Pretty much who you just described.
Except he's 240 pounds.
Yeah, but he's really fast for his 240 pounds.
He really is.
So looking at your model, you actually, you don't have a hot take, but the model has a hot take.
Yes.
The model spit out Rashad White, Arizona State running back, as number 1 ahead of Breece Hall. What made the model do that, I guess?
I actually disagree with this. The model, it needs a stern talking to about this, because Breece Hall is far and away the running back 1 in this class, and it's not even a little bit close. But Rashad White did have some really impressive numbers. His involvement in the passing game was insane over at Arizona State. I mean, he had 2.8 weighted yards per team pass attempt in his final year there, which is the bar for the percentile. It is at the 99th percentile for that score. For his team adjusted yards per team attempt, he's at the 94th percentile. Experience adjusted yards per team attempt, he's at the 93rd percentile. He in terms of his numbers, I know there's some concerns about him being a JUCO transfer, him being older, 23 years old. I think people have been really scouring the internet to try and find his age. I think we have it nailed down at 23 years old. In terms of his numbers, he looks like he could right the wrongs of all Arizona State running backs in the past, of Eno Benjamin and Kalen Ballage, that we are all scared of over the last few years. So I think he is I do think he's going to be a really good player in the NFL, should he be able to get that higher draft capital. But I mean, regardless of the draft capital, I think he has the potential to be a good player. And he came in at the Senior Bowl closer to like at 6 foot, 215, 210, something like that, which is way better than what his college listing was. I was
6 foot, half an inch, and 210.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think his college profile had him at like 6'3", 205 or something.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm much happier with his measurables from the Senior Bowl. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely agree with everything you said. I mean, Rashad White is a guy who like jumps off the page for me, whether it be, looking at stats, looking at film. I haven't totally graded everyone yet, but Breece Hall came out as about like 90% and Rashad White 86%, which is second for now. I've done most of the good players. I don't think anyone's going to jump Rashad White. So I'm pretty confident with saying that he's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
But like you did mention, he is 5 years removed from high school at this point, a JUCO transfer. Do you think, those 3 years at JUCO kind of made him like more physically advanced than his teammates or his competition or anything like that? Does any of that kind of worry you?
I mean, the thing is, it's definitely a possibility. But there are also other players who are that age, who have been around that long, who are not that dominant on their team, in their conference. So, I mean, he's a good player, and good players will find their way into the NFL. And so at the end of the day, there is some concern, and it probably will be factored in, especially when you're looking at dynasty rankings and you see the age apex is 26. For running backs, before you kind of start to see more of a decline. It looks like it's getting a little older now with some different the way that players are taking care of their bodies and stuff. But it still scares you when you have potential to draft 21-year-old running backs who may get higher draft capital. So I understand the concern there. But when you're looking at it purely from an analytical standpoint and what this guy has and seeing some of his highlights too, I mean, he can really explode.
Yeah, and those teammates that he was going up against for carries and targets and things like that, they weren't bad players. I mean, we see like some other guys will mention like a Tyler Algiere type who played with 2-star running backs with him. Rashad White was playing alongside Diamante Traynham, who was like a top 15 running back in his class.
Yeah.
Daniel Ngata, who has been very efficient in limited carries. So White outperformed both those guys. I think he's really impressive. Obviously, you do as well. But the guy we both agree on being the locked-in RB1 is Breece Hall. What makes him so special?
Dude, I love him. And, he's been so good throughout his entire career at Iowa State. Every single one of the, for a guy that size and being able to be involved in the passing game too, as he is in the rushing game, his weighted yards per team attempt is 2.2 yards per team attempt, which is the 94th percentile. Adjusted for team, for the team involvement as well, still puts him at 91st percentile. And his age adjusted over the average of his career is in the 92nd percentile. I mean, for a guy who's probably going to get second round draft capital, having those high of numbers puts him in some pretty elite territory in terms of a prospect. I'm not very high on this running back class as a whole. I am a little scared off by a lot of these players, but Breece Hall feels like the most sure. I mean, he feels. I thought Jonathan Taylor was going to be one of the most elite prospects like coming in when he was drafted. I mean, I'm not saying Breece Hall is going to be that good because I don't think he's going to be that good. But in terms of is he going to hit in the NFL, it feels as sure of a thing as Jonathan Taylor was when he came in for me.
Yeah, I think that's high praise for sure for Hall. And, just the narrative, in my opinion, just kind of watching. I mean, we saw this dude break out as a freshman. Everybody was all like, oh my goodness, Breece Hall is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then he had 2 great seasons after that. And now it seems the narrative has switched to the 2022 class is bad.
People are
Therefore,
bored.
Breece Hall is bad. Yeah, it's like people are
bored
bored of Breece Hall. Yeah, because everybody's like, oh, Bijan Robinson or Travion Henderson. Yeah, but like Breece Hall has been this same level of production as these 2 guys for the past 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Absolutely killing it. And I think even myself, I've like fallen behind and I've been like, oh, well, Breece Hall, he's the RB1 in this class, but that doesn't mean he's good.
But who cares?
Yeah. I think I'm starting to turn around. I think he is really, really freaking good.
Yeah. I mean, I took him in the mock draft that we're working on. I took him at the 101 because I think that, as I said, he is as much of a sure thing to me as I can think of in this class. And, so I'm really high on him. I think he's going to be really, really good in the NFL. And I think you should just roll with that and, put him at 1 and then start figuring out the rest of the running back ranks after that.
Oh, for running back, that is absolutely for certain. I mean, and I don't think very many people are going to disagree with you.
Yeah.
But we'll get to those people in a few minutes here. But next up in the model was number 3, Tyler Algiere, out of BYU, former linebacker. Quite the story there. I think there's a lot to like analytically. I mean, he outperformed his teammates. He has the size you want. He's 5'11", 220, at least in theory. What differentiates Algiere kind of from other guys in this class?
Yeah, so I actually threw you a little bit of a curveball on this because I made a typo in the rankings that I sent you. And he is not nearly as high in the actual rankings here. So his last season and ended up pretty good. So he had 2 yards per team pass attempt when waiting for passing yards as well. And that puts him at a 62nd percentile. So his last season was really good. But when you're looking at the other stats, and most of these are weighted for average throughout his career. So he's at a little bit of a disadvantage for, changing positions and some other things going on. But he, for his entire playing career, has him at 1.1 weighted yards per team pass attempt, which is 26th percentile. Negative 0.2 team adjusted, which if you're in the negatives, it's not a great thing. That means that your teammates are outperforming you on a per carry basis. This is actually one of the things Noah More Parties really likes to look at, is how a player does comparatively to their teammates. He does a yards per carry plus that looks at the difference between what a player's yards per carry is compared to what their teammates' yards per carry are. So you can take a look at efficiency that way. But him being at a negative 0.2 team adjusted puts him in the 12th percentile. And then experience adjusted puts him at the 12th percentile as well. So there's definitely some concerns on Tyler Algiere. I know some people really like him. He's big. He's probably going to be fast. He can catch the ball. He'll probably be, I don't know at this point. I mean, he'll probably be a 3rd round pick. Maybe a little bit later, the 4th round, something around there. So I think he's going to be a situation where if he gets a chance, he'll probably look good on the field because he's big and fast. And sometimes that's all you need to be good in the NFL. But his analytical profile in terms of the average throughout his career isn't what you'd want to look at. If you're looking at purely last year's stats, it does look very good. And so maybe it's one of those deals where he's learning to play the position a little more, and that'll just continue to grow. But looking at his career in college, it's a little concerning.
That's definitely interesting because you mentioned Noah and his work. And I mean, I've been, addicted to reading these things that he puts out. And going back to Algiere's, he mentions that he was a full 2 yards per carry better than his teammates in yards per carry plus, which would be 92nd percentile.
All right.
In yards per carry plus. So, I mean, obviously lots of different numbers we're looking at. Some of them like Tyler Algiere, some of them don't. So that's the ambiguity of scouting in general. I mean, we're always going to have differing opinions. We're always going to have numbers that are sometimes different, sometimes the same. And that's, what makes this whole process so fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I lost my show sheet. I accidentally clicked too high. Oh, goodness. Now we're all out of whack. Okay. No, I still clicked on the wrong thing. Where did it go? Okay. Technical difficulties. Stand by. Everything is breaking. I did mention that we were going to talk about, some of these people who don't want to put Breece Hall at RB1. And, most, probably 90% of the people I've seen who don't have Breece Hall at RB1 have Isaiah Spiller at RB1. But analytically, I've seen some things that are really scary. What would you kind of say about Spiller?
Spiller is a difficult case because he started his college career really strong, and he looked like he was going to be a very good prospect. But his yards per team attempt, his expected rushing yards throughout his college career really dropped as the years continued on. I mean, he just had this last season, a 32nd percentile in adjusted yards per team attempt for this last season, which is not good. But if you want to take the average over his career, it looks pretty good. Everything is above the 65th percentile when you're looking at weighted yards per team attempt, team adjusted, and experience adjusted. But when you start to look at this last year and the year before that, it's looking a little more dire when you're trying to compare prospects that way.
The dogs are barking a little bit for Blake. Don't worry about it too much.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. I mean, we love, our furry friends on the University podcast. But yeah, Spiller, I mean, he's 6'1", 215, super athletic, has shown he can catch passes. There are definitely things like on the surface level that are so, tempting. But I mean, you look at things like you said, and then I saw a tweet from Jarek Backus today who mentioned his rushing yards over expected, and had the graph of his cumulative rushing yards over expected, and that
Right.
thing starts at 0 and it just goes negative
Just
his
nose
entire
dives.
career. Yeah. I mean, that's concerning. I don't know. What do you do with Spiller?
At the end of the day, he's probably going to get draft capital. He's a big guy. He's probably going to run a pretty good 40. If you want to talk about his talent differentiation compared to the rest of the class, I don't think he necessarily has that in terms of what his numbers say. But he will probably get in a pretty good situation, and he will probably end up being a decent running back in terms of NFL production and fantasy football production. And that's kind of what you have to end up looking at. In that perspective. I mean, if you want to compare talent profiles of players, he's probably not in the top 4 for me when you're looking at RB talent profile. But as I said, he's a big running back. He's probably going to get the opportunity. He's probably going to get the draft capital. And you have to take that information, even if you don't think that they're the most talented running back. Because as I said before, the actual talent differentiation between the best running back and the guy who is not going to play it down in the NFL isn't nearly as big as most of the other positions in the NFL.
But would it be worrying that if Spiller were to miss time or to just have another guy working with him, that he could outshine because he is slightly more that this other guy could outshine Spiller because he is not as talented?
Yeah, I mean, that's the concern, right? I mean, the concern is that he doesn't take on a full workload. Hold on, my dogs are going crazy. The concern is that he doesn't get the full workload, right? He's a big running back, 6'1", 215 is what we have listed here for him. And you'd hope that when you're drafting Isaiah Spiller, probably where you're going to draft him, he's going to be a potential 3-down running back. But is he talented enough to warrant that type of workload? I don't necessarily think so. So I think he'll probably end up being in a committee you don't want that if you're talking non-superflex leagues, you're probably going to draft him as a top 5-6 pick, most likely in leagues. And I think I'm going to be staying away for the most part when it comes to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, there's a place for shots on players, and I mean, I don't think taking the shot on Spiller where he is right now is worth it. So,
yeah,
absolutely agree. Moving on, we talked about running back size in the past, and you said, these smaller guys, you want them to catch passes. So here's a smaller guy who catches passes straight out of Notre Dame, Kyron Williams. He's listed at 5'9", 199. 199 might be a little bit gratuitous from Notre Dame. So obviously we'll see in March. Yeah. But do you think Williams can be a true 3-down back?
A true 3-down back? No.
What about like a 3rd-down back disguised as a 3-down back?
My best comp for him is James White, and I think he's going to get better draft capital than James White got when he came into the NFL. Honestly, I think it's going to be a bit more situational based. If a team can really focus in on him being the 3rd-down guy, getting the passing, getting a good amount of passing work, getting a good target, because he is a really good pass catcher. I mean, he had 2.1 weighted yards per team attempt over his career. That puts him in the 89th percentile. And that's not because of his rushing yards. I mean, he was a good rusher, but he's also a very good pass catcher as well. And so I think if he gets in the right situation, he's going to be a really good fantasy asset. I don't think I would look at this and think, man, he has the potential to be a 3-down back in the NFL, because I don't think that's realistic at his size. But I think what his role in the NFL is going to be very palatable for fantasy football.
So what separates Kyron Williams from a guy like Austin Eckler?
It's a great question. When you're looking at that, I mean, what is Austin Eckler's BMI? I mean, he's
listed as 5'10", 200.
Okay. Let me look up BMI real fast.
I want to say that's like 28.5.
Yeah, I mean, he's only a 34th percentile BMI. I mean, but this is kind of what we talked about before, right? We talk about the size and the speed when it's not necessarily that you have to use it verbatim, but when you start to stray away from what is actual data. So we don't have a lot of players like Austin Eckler who have done this in the NFL, right? He's considered an outlier. And absolutely. I don't necessarily want to bet on outliers. So at the end of the day, there could be nothing. When your question, what's the difference between the two? The answer is nothing. But at that point, outlier for him to be a 3-down running back. And I'm not betting on that. But as I said, I think he's going to be a good player. I think he does have a rushing skill set. But I do think he's very good, very competent in the passing game. And he could be a very good NFL asset and fantasy football asset because of it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look up outlier at running back, I mean, Austin Eckler might as well be the picture. This is a guy who's undrafted, didn't get invited to the combine, smaller back, and has been absolutely incredibly successful. So I think everything you say is correct. And so we'll go ahead and move on to Kenneth Walker out of Michigan State. He's listed at 5'10", 210. Very solid numbers there. And he's been a favorite of many after, a breakout season following his transfer from Wake Forest up to Michigan State. But at least what you sent me, he's 6th. What kind of knocks him down there for you and for your model?
Yeah, so it's kind of the average throughout his career of weighted yards per team attempt. And really those passing yards or his lack of passing yards weighs him down there. It puts him in the 42nd percentile. For weighted yards per team attempt. I think in terms of a pure rusher, I think he's probably one of the best in the class, but you do have to have a little bit of concern about his receiving work that he had, whether that's because that just wasn't part of the scheme or it wasn't, just a part of his skill set. I don't think we'll know at this point, but when you look at all the other prospects, they or at least those towards the top, they did have good pass catching productivity. You can project them to have a decent pass catching share in the NFL because of their productivity. When you're looking at Kenneth Walker, I don't know what to do with it. People are going back and looking at his high school highlights and showing what kind of hands he has in high school. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go back and look at high school numbers for it. He didn't catch passes in college. I can't extrapolate that out to say he's going to get past receiving work in the NFL. So I don't really know what to do with that at this point. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, he had 19 receptions over 3 years of college.
Right.
I mean, just like the dumb number to throw out is you need 20 receptions in a single season.
Yeah.
So definitely concerning. But you do kind of look back at Wake Forest. I mean, so Wake Forest has about the least NFL offense ever, other than the service academies, because the quarterback's going to take the ball, he's going to put it in the running back's chest, and it's going to stay there for 10 seconds.
Right.
Obviously hyperbole, but
after
that, I mean, there's no throwing it to the running back because he's right in front of you. Why would you throw it to him? Yeah. I mean, so running backs combined in Walker's freshman season had a combined 12 receptions at Wake Forest. The guy who took over the job this year, Christian Beal Smith, had 9 receptions last season. So I understand why people want to make excuses for it, because there's the excuse. I mean, Wake Forest doesn't throw it to the running back. But you figure these teams are going to make exceptions to get their best players the ball.
And that's what I was just thinking. I was about to say is that, I mean, if he's good in a pass catching role, they'll line him up out wide. They'll put him in the slot. They'll do something with him so that he can be involved in the passing role. If you were a good player that deserves targets, and I mean, I don't want to underestimate the incompetence of some college programs, but you would think that if he was that good at it and deserved to be in the passing game, they would figure out a way to get him the ball. And that's kind of what that weighted yards per team attempt is intended to do, is if you're a running back and you deserve to get pass catching work as well, if you're a running back, you should have a good share of your team's total yards if you are a good NFL prospect. So it's definitely a concern. And I can't really sit here and say that he's going to be a good pass catcher in the NFL based on his line of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that pretty much wraps up all of like the big running backs I had ready for us to talk about. But I did want to talk about one player who you hyped up, earlier in the offseason. I got a little excited about, he's been a roller coaster for me, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Sincere McCormick. He ended up in the model you sent me at 11th. So, what gives?
So, honestly, in terms of the three items, there are obviously other variables in the model outside of what we're talking about. These are just the biggest influencers, in my opinion, of what I'm looking at before I start building out this model. But he has some really good numbers. And you would hope so. For a small school guy, when you're looking at these type of prospects, they need to like totally dominate their team's offensive production. So, and he does just that, being in the 88th percentile of weighted team yards or yards per team attempt. His team adjusted yards per team attempt is the 92nd percentile. Experience adjusted yards per team attempt is in the 92nd percentile. So, he has really good numbers in terms of when you're looking at yards per team attempt. There is some concern about how much passing work he got. But they did line him out in the slot quite a bit. It looks like he just didn't end up getting, like, you would hope for a small school guy who could potentially catch passes that they would figure out a way to get him the ball as a receiver more often than not. So there's a little bit of concern there. I actually think he's going to end up being I think he's a pretty good talent. I just worry about like where is he going to end up getting drafted? I think he has the potential of being like an Elijah Mitchell type player where he gets some pretty low draft capital. People look at his size and, kind of discount him, but he could go to the right situation, like a Miami or something like that, and could be the Elijah Mitchell for the Miami Dolphins or something along those lines.
Yeah, literally. Same offensive coordinator and everything.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a great breakdown of McCormick. Is there a running back that you think the fantasy football community just isn't talking about enough?
The running backs, they're kind of tough this year because I think there's a decent player at the top. I think Rashad White is obviously my main pick. I think that people are going to end up being too low on him. You've already seen him start to rise up draft boards. The mock draft website that I'm looking at has already raised him about 20 picks since the Senior Bowl. So he's already rising in terms of his draft capital. Another one that I'm really interested in, and I'm starting to look more into, I've seen some really smart people talk highly about him, is Tyler Beatty. Is that how you pronounce it? Beatty?
I think it's Beatty.
Beatty. So over his entire career, it's not the greatest looking thing in the world, but last season, he had a 91st percentile in adjusted yards per team attempt. And then he also had a 91st percentile in experience adjusted yards per team attempt. So even though he was later into his career, when you're still adjusting that for his age, it is a really successful season. I know some people, I don't know where he's going to end up in the draft, but the only person that has a higher adjusted yards per team attempt in their last season was Rashad White. No other player that I'm looking at. The only other player in the last couple years that has had that high of an adjusted yards per team attempt in their last season is Najee Harris and Kenny Gainwell. So, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but his numbers in last season say that he could end up being a pretty good player.
Yeah, I mean, just last season, 1,600 rushing yards, 54 receptions. Um, and, on the surface level, like Tyler Beatty stuck out to me as well, because I saw that and I was like, oh my goodness, this could be a good player that nobody's talking about. And obviously he went to the Senior Bowl and he got some good reviews at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about like teammate score in college, teammate score at the Senior Bowl wasn't very good this season.
Right. Yeah.
For running backs, at least.
He's playing with Rashad White, though. I think they were on the same team.
Rashad White, and then other players who play running back.
Damian Pierce. People seem to really like Damian Pierce. I'm not a fan, but people seem to like him as well.
It seemed to like him, so that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
But I mean, so yeah, that all encouraged me to like break down Beatty, look deeper. I went to the film. I wasn't impressed.
Not impressed?
No. I mean, the 54 receptions, you're like, oh, this guy's going to be a third down back. He's going to catch so many passes. And he does catch a lot of passes, but it's because the rest of the offense is garbage and none of the wide receivers are ever open.
Yeah, so it was like the Leonard Fournette corollary when he was in Jacksonville, where he got like 100 targets, but it was only because there was literally no one else to throw it to. And
it's kind of what it looked like. And to me, like, I look for players who catch the ball outside of their bodies, right? Like with their hands. And he looked like he was catching it with his body most of the time.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to like rain on the parade of Tyler.
This is not this, dude. I mean, as I said, there are some good players at the top, like 5 running backs. I mean, I'm not saying they're all going to hit, but they look like pretty decent prospects. After that, I mean, we talked about Noah Hills earlier. He did a randomizer to make his running back scores on a YouTube video. You might as well just do that. I mean, Jerome Ford, he looks like he's going to end up being pretty good. His numbers looked good his last season, very average across his career. But you can just put a randomizer. You could just take draft capital and just slap the rankings that way, however they get drafted, and call that a day.
Yeah,
it's going to be tough to differentiate them after the first 5 or 6.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing about Beatty, just real quick after that, I mean, his junior season, he had 28 receptions for 333 yards. His senior season, he had 54 receptions for 330 yards.
Got to love that non-efficient receiving work.
I mean, it was literally just like the only way Missouri could move the ball at all. So,
yeah,
I mean, that could be a good sign. Like if you're the only player on a team that can move the ball, that means you're usually good. But
yeah,
I don't know. Definitely an enigma wrapped in a question there.
Yeah, for sure.
Which running back on the other hand has taken too much of our time? Just should have never been talked about, but yeah, we still talked about him.
As I said, man, I mean, well, it's funny. I think Brian Robinson is not good. I do not think he's a good running back. I get why people are intrigued by him, and he had to play with some other decent players, but I mean, his numbers over his career, I mean, it's just not good. And I don't care where you play. If you're good, you're going to get opportunity to play. And I mean, even his last season, where people are saying, oh, he did really well his last season. I mean, he still only had 1.9 adjusted yards per team attempt, which puts him at the 48th percentile. So even in his starstruck last year, I mean, when you're looking at a number as simple as adjusted yards per team attempt, he's still below the 50th percentile mark. He's probably going to get some third round draft capital because some scout sees a 230, 240 pound running back, sees a guy who can potentially pass block really well, and they want to establish the run with a guy that large. But I mean, his numbers just say that he's not a good running back, and he's really inefficient with his touches too.
Yeah. I mean, and he's a guy who, wore red in college and didn't have a logo on the side of his helmet.
People love some Alabama players.
Yeah. Luckily, John Gruden's not in the league anymore, or else, Brian Robinson would be gone in the first round.
Jameson Williams, Brian Robinson to the Raiders if Gruden was still there.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Alex Leatherwood, Cleveland Farrell. Like what? Just
The whole gang.
if that guy played in the college football playoff, he's going to be on my team.
Yep. Exactly.
And I mean, further context to the Robinson situation, I mean, that I think a lot of people who, you know, are just looking at this now don't necessarily have is that Jace McClellan was this 5-star running back who was a sophomore last season, maybe a freshman, but expected to do well and, you know, showed some flashes when he was healthy, and then he went down. And that's kind of when, you know, Robinson went from just being like the 1A to being the 1. And I think that's a big reason why he had so much production last season.
Right.
And I don't think we'd be talking about him near the same way if the rest of his teammates stayed healthy. So, yeah, I agree. Robinson, not necessarily someone we need to talk about very much, and somebody who, you know, maybe we're talking about too much already. So, you know, that'll do us for today. I mean, like we said, we're not going to get into those quarterbacks and tight ends. Boring and too difficult.
Yep. Especially right now.
Yeah.
There's still information being gathered, and I'm sure we'll get to something in a month or two, but right now it's not there.
Yeah. But I did have one more thing to ask you about, and I normally like want to do this, but somebody, Adam Hutchinson, replied to one of my tweets and was like, ask him about Paris Campbell. And then earlier today, he called me cute. So I'm going to ask this question. What about Paris Campbell?
I hate Adam. I hate Adam, and I dislike Paris Campbell. The thing is, and I go against my Tutu Atwell thing every single time, I feel like. But when a play, regardless of if it's injury or not, when a player doesn't play their rookie season and they get as few snaps as Paris Campbell gets, they become an outlier going forward of a productive NFL wide receiver, regardless of what you saw, you know, the very short time last year, because he looked like he could have potentially become something decent, but then he got injured again. And you, as I said, regardless of situation, what happens, why, there's not very good historical information for players producing thereafter. And Adam loves Paris Campbell and texts me about it like weekly, except earlier this year when he said, I think Paris Campbell is dead. So I think that everyone's getting close to the realization. I think I saw him going like the 21st, 22nd round of a startup. So I think we're finally getting close to where his value is. I'm just not a big fan of Paris Campbell. I put out a poll earlier of who would you rather have in Dynasty, Dare Ogunbowale or Paris Campbell? And like 90% of the people still want Paris Campbell. Dare Ogunbowale won people leagues last year. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, Dare Ogunbowale could start week 1 because James Robinson and Travis Etienne are both still hurt.
See, you guys everyone is discounting the Jaguars running back 1 and saying they would rather have Paris Campbell over that. Just fools.
I saw in the chat of the stream that Michael Duncan said, live react to the USFL draft or you're a coward.
I didn't even know it was going on tonight.
So really quickly, I opened this up.
Okay.
Kind of like the XFL draft, if you remember.
Yeah, of course.
The rounds are by position. So the first round was quarterbacks only.
Okay.
The Michigan Panthers started out with Shea Patterson.
No freaking way.
First off the board, Shea Patterson, joining Jeff Fisher in Michigan, I believe.
You know it's going to be a good league when he's the 101.
Yeah, the 102, also a former Ole Miss quarterback, Jordan Ta'amu, going to the Tampa Bay Bandits.
He is going to make his living off of these little side hustle football leagues that are coming up.
Oh, goodness. Too bad Philip Walker couldn't join him again.
Oh, man.
The Philadelphia Stars, which Michael Duncan just said, go Philadelphia Stars. In the first round of the draft, they drafted a guy. I bet Michael Duncan has no clue who he is. His name is Brian Scott from Occidental College.
That is totally a made up person. Brian Scott from Occidental College. That is like a creative player in
Fox Sports
NCAA 14 or whatever year that.
The Fox Sports page says Brian Scott is the Aaron Rodgers of Division III football.
I'm gonna watch it now. Let's go Stars.
He attended USC's Pro Day in 2017, where in USC's Pro Day, he went 62 for 64 with one drop.
With no defense or what?
I don't know. It's a pro day. Who knows? But he played in the Canadian Football League for the BC Lions for the past 2 or 3 years. He's 26, so here we go.
Okay.
A centerpiece for the Philadelphia Stars to build around.
Good for them. They're looking good already with the Aaron Rodgers.
The D3 football.
Yeah.
Ooh, here we go. The New Jersey Generals at number 4 picked Ben Holmes, a 5'10", 200-pound quarterback from Tarleton State, who initially started at wide receiver in high school and junior college before switching to quarterback at Tarleton State University.
Dude, they had much more talent in the XFL.
Yeah.
This isn't good. Just hearing these names, that's not great.
Clayton Thorson went number 5 to the
I don't know who
Gamblers.
that is.
He was a 5th-round pick by the Eagles in 2019.
Man, Philadelphia is just running this league.
He played for Northwestern in college. Oh,
I do know who that is now. Now that you would say Northwestern, I always know those Riley Northwestern quarterbacks who always randomly get a shot and never do anything.
And then our number 6 pick was Alex McGow, Florida International, 7th-round pick of the Seahawks in 2018.
Okay.
And then 7 and 8, we go back-to-back Kyles. The Pittsburgh Maulers took Kyle Lauletta.
Ooh, the Spiders.
Yeah, former
Richmond
New York
Spiders.
Giants backup. He was the MVP of the Senior Bowl in 2018.
That's just not shocking.
That's a stat. And then last but not least, the New Orleans Breakers went Kyle Sloter from Melbourne.
Sloter time. He was pretty good though. Like if he would have been given a chance, he could have done something as a backup. So he slipped to the 10th overall.
8th. The last quarterback taken in the first round.
Well, taking the Aaron Rodgers of D3 over Sloter are going to be very disappointed.
I don't really want to talk about the rest of this draft other than the quarterbacks because I don't see any names I recognize.
Yeah.
Yikes. Okay. There's one guy named Michael Scott, but it's not.
Also made up.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that'll do us for today. We've been all over the place. But Blake, tell the good people where they could find you.
Yeah, you can find me, all my writing and work at the Undroppables, working on a few things behind the scenes too. But you can find me on Twitter at Blake A. Hampton for everything I'm doing on there.
All right. Absolutely. Thrilled to have you on. Thrilled to bring the podcast back. Thank you for coming on. I will see you guys later.